I thought I was walking into a quiet dinner for my 30th birthday. Instead, I walked into a room full of witnesses and a folder built to erase me. My parents did not realize the one person they never wanted hearing their speech was already standing in the back by the time the candles went out. The DNA was not the biggest reveal, a $12 bottle of wine in, a suitcase and a legal file out. My name is Riley Adams. I'm sitting on the floor of my apartment in downtown Philadelphia. The room echoes in a way that makes my skin crawl because the sound has nowhere to land. The walls are bare. The nail holes where my framed degree and my watercolor prints used to hang look like tiny, dark punctures in the drywall. There are 8 boxes taped shut near the door and 3 more half open, spilling out the debris of the last decade of my life. I am not moving because I want to. I am moving because I have to disappear. It has been 6 days since my 30th birthday. 6 days since I walked into my parents' house in Haven Ridge expecting a cake and a toast, and instead walked into a dismantling of my entire history. Most people think the hardest part of a situation like this would be the shock. They think the moment your world cracks open is the moment you scream or faint or fall to your knees. But that is not how it happened for me. The strangest part was not finding out the truth about my biology. The strangest part was realizing that my childhood had been itemized like a utility bill. I am looking at a copy of the document right now. It is sitting on top of a box of winter coats. It is a spreadsheet. My father made it. It has columns and rows and formulas at the bottom. It lists everything. The cost of my braces in middle school, the emergency room copay from when I broke my wrist falling off a swing in the 4th grade, the cost of the prom dress I only wore once, the adjusted inflation of the food I ate between the years of 1996 and 2026. When you look at a document like that, you do not feel sad. You feel a quiet, creeping horror. You realize that while you were hugging your father after a nightmare, he was mentally calculating the cost of the electricity for the nightlight. You realize that while you were making Mother's Day cards with construction paper and glue, your mother was filing away the receipts for the craft supplies, waiting for the day she could ask for a refund. I am not writing this story because I want revenge. That is what they will say. Of course, my father is already telling the neighbors that I am unstable. He is telling the people at their church, the same people who watched me grow up, that I am ungrateful and bitter. He is spinning a narrative where he is the victim of a parasite he tried to help. If I stay silent, his version of the story becomes the truth. If I do not speak, my silence looks like an admission of guilt. It feels like complicity. So I am writing this down not to burn them to the ground, but to put a barrier between their lies and my reality. I need to prove, if only to myself, that I existed before they decided I was a bad investment. Turning 30 was supposed to be a clean milestone. I had a plan for this year. I have a job I actually like at Brightwell and Company Solutions. I finally paid off my car. I felt, for the first time in my adult life, that I had my feet on solid ground. I thought this birthday dinner was going to be a celebration of that stability. I thought we would eat roast chicken, drink some wine, and talk about the future. I did not know that my parents had been planning this night for months. I did not know that to them, my 30th birthday was not a celebration, it was a deadline. The way they did it was so polite. That is the part that keeps me awake at night. It was not a violent scene from a movie. There were no screaming matches. There were no thrown plates. It was chillingly civil. My mother wore her pearls. My father wore his navy blazer, the one he usually saves for funerals and important client meetings. They invited 70 or 80 people, family friends, business partners, neighbors we had not spoken to in years. They set the stage perfectly. They wanted witnesses. They wanted an audience to validate them. They wanted to perform their rejection of me so publicly that I would be too shamed to fight back. They thought that if they crushed me in front of everyone I knew, I would simply crumble and fade away. They wanted to hand me that folder, show me the DNA results that said 0% relation, and watch me walk out the door with my head down. But they made a mistake. They were so focused on the script they had written, so focused on the spreadsheet and the legal release form they wanted me to sign, that they did not look closely at who was actually in the room. They invited the world to watch my execution, but they did not realize they had let a wolf into the sheep pen. There was a woman standing in the back of the room that night. She was wearing a sharp gray suit. She was not eating the appetizers. She was not drinking the punch. She was just watching. My parents did not know who she was. They probably assumed she was a +1 of a cousin or a colleague from the Rotary Club. They had no idea that she was holding a file of her own. They had no idea that by the time the night was over, she would be the one holding the match, not them. I keep thinking about the nature of love. We are taught that love is unconditional. We are taught that a parent's love for a child is a biological imperative, a bond that cannot be broken by something as trivial as money or genetics. But what happens when you find out that for 30 years, your parents were just waiting out the clock? What happens when you realize that every hug was a lie, and every "I love you" was just a placeholder until they could legally evict you? If love can be canceled by paperwork, what was it before the paperwork? Was it ever real? Or was I just a long-term house guest they were too polite to kick out until the lease was up? I feel heavy. My body feels like it is made of lead. I am looking at my hands, the same hands I have looked at every day of my life, and they look foreign to me. I share no DNA with the people who raised me. The quirks I thought I inherited from my father, the way I tap my fingers when I'm thinking, the way I sneeze, are not genetic. They are just mimicry. I am a copy of a copy. But the woman in the suit, Marianne, she told me something before I left that night. She told me that I was not a mistake. She told me that I was a deliberate choice, just not the choice my parents claimed I was. I am taping up the last box now. It contains the few photos I decided to keep. Me at graduation. Me with my first dog. I am leaving everything else behind. I do not want their furniture. I do not want their gifts. I want nothing that can be added to that spreadsheet. The sun is starting to set over the city. The light is hitting the dust motes dancing in the empty air of my apartment. I am scared. I have no family. I have no history that I can trust. I have a lawyer I met 6 days ago and a biological family I have not met yet living in Maryland. I am walking into a fog. But I am walking. That is the important part. My parents tried to end my story on their terms. They wanted the final chapter to be my humiliation. They wanted the last image to be me, weeping and broken, signing a document that absolved them of all responsibility. They failed. I stand up and brush the dust off my jeans. I pick up the folder. My folder. The one with the truth in it, not their lies. I look around this empty room one last time. It does not feel like home anymore. But then again, I'm starting to realize I never really had a home. I just had a place where I was stored. I remember walking up the driveway in Haven Ridge that night, the gravel crunching under my boots, the smell of wood smoke in the air, the tightness in my chest that I mistook for excitement. I remember clutching the neck of the wine bottle I had stopped to buy at the liquor store on the highway. It was a red blend, cheap, simple, a gesture of goodwill. I smile, but there is no humor in it. It is a sharp, cold expression that hurts my face. I brought a $12 bottle of wine. I left with a suitcase and a legal file. The drive to Haven Ridge usually takes me 45 minutes, but that night, the traffic on the interstate was forgiving. I had the windows down, letting the cool Pennsylvania air rush through the car, carrying the scent of damp asphalt and pine. It was the kind of October evening that feels crisp and promising. The air stripped of summer humidity, leaving everything sharp and clear. I was in a good mood. That is important to remember. I was not anxious. I was not dreading a family obligation. I was actually feeling a rare sense of accomplishment. Earlier that afternoon at Brightwell and Company Solutions, I had finally cracked the logistics problem for the distribution account I had been wrestling with for 3 weeks. My boss had nodded at me during the wrap-up meeting. A quick, approving tilt of the head that meant more than a bonus. I felt competent. I felt like an adult who had finally figured out how to navigate the world. I was turning 30, and for the first time, the number did not feel like a ticking clock. It felt like a foundation. I remember tapping my fingers against the steering wheel to the rhythm of a song I had not heard since college. I was thinking about the bottle of wine sitting on the passenger seat. It was a red blend, nothing fancy, but I had picked it up because the label featured a drawing of a black dog that looked exactly like the stray I used to feed when I was a kid. It felt like a small, private joke I could share with my mother. I thought we would have a glass, maybe sit on the back patio if it was not too cold, and just breathe. When I turned off the main road and onto the winding streets of my parents' subdivision, the sky was turning a deep, bruised purple. The streetlights were just flickering on, casting long orange shadows across the manicured lawns. This neighborhood was the definition of quiet stability. It was the kind of place where people find you if your grass was half an inch too high, where trash cans were pulled in from the curb exactly 1 hour after the truck left. That is why the cars unsettled me first. It started 4 houses down from my parents' driveway. A silver sedan was parked halfway on the grass, then a truck, then a line of vehicles hugging the curb on both sides of the street, narrowing the road to a single, claustrophobic lane. I slowed down, my tires crunching over dry leaves. I checked the dashboard clock. It was 6:55 in the evening. My first thought was not a party. My first thought was a disaster. In a neighborhood like this, a crowd this size meant a crisis. I thought of Mrs. Gable, the elderly widow next door. Did she fall? Was there a fire? I scanned the roof lines for smoke. I rolled down my window, expecting to hear sirens or shouting, but there was nothing. No flashing lights, no ambulances. Just rows of empty cars staring back at me like silent sentinels. I had to park 2 blocks away, squeezing my car in front of a fire hydrant and hoping no one would notice. I grabbed the wine bottle by the neck and started walking. The air felt different now. The crispness was gone, replaced by a heavy static tension. I walked faster, my heels clicking a frantic rhythm on the pavement. I was replaying scenarios in my head. Maybe my father had a heart attack. Maybe my mother had collapsed. Why hadn't they called me? Why did I have to find out by seeing a blockade of Toyotas and Fords lining the street? By the time I reached the driveway, I was nearly running. The house looked normal from the outside. The porch light was on. The curtains were drawn, glowing with a warm, yellow light from within. It looked peaceful, which somehow made the knot in my stomach tighten. I bypassed the front door. We never used the front door. That was for strangers and census takers. I went to the side garage door, punching the code into the keypad. The mechanism whirred and clicked, a sound I had heard 1,000 times since I was 12 years old. I lifted the heavy door and stepped inside. The smell hit me instantly. It was the smell of my childhood: motor oil, sawdust, old paint cans stored on metal shelving, and the faint, sweet scent of gasoline. It was the smell of my father's projects. His workbench was tidy. Tools hung on the pegboard in order of size. My mother's gardening gloves were draped over a bag of potting soil. It was so familiar, so safe, that my heartbeat slowed down for a second. I took a deep breath. I told myself I was overreacting. It was probably just a neighborhood meeting, a homeowners association grievance, something mundane. I reached for the door that led from the garage into the kitchen. I expected to find my mother at the sink, maybe rinsing vegetables, or my father sitting at the island with the newspaper. I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The air shifted immediately. It was not just a change in temperature, it was a change in pressure. The warm, food-smelling air of the kitchen rushed out to meet the cold garage air, but it carried something else with it. Silence, a profound, heavy silence. I stepped onto the linoleum floor, the wine bottle swinging by my side, and stopped dead. The kitchen was full. The living room beyond it was full. The dining room to my left was full. There were people everywhere, but they were not mingling. They were not holding drinks and laughing. They were standing in rows, pressed against the walls, filling the open spaces like standing room-only ticket holders. I blinked, trying to process the visual data. I recognized faces, but they were out of context. There was Mr. Henderson, my father's accountant, standing near the refrigerator. There was the pastor from the church we stopped attending 5 years ago, standing by the pantry. There were neighbors I had not spoken to since high school. There were my aunt and uncle from Ohio. People who never traveled unless it was for a wedding or a funeral. There must have been 70 or 80 people packed into the downstairs of the house, and every single one of them was looking at me. "Surprise?" I said, but the word came out as a question, weak and breathy. No one shouted, no one threw confetti, no one smiled. The silence stretched out, agonizing and thick. It was the kind of silence you hear in a courtroom right before the verdict is read. A few people shuffled their feet. Someone coughed into their fist, but nobody moved toward me. They just stared. Their expressions were not happy. They were not even welcoming. They looked curious, morbidly curious, like they were watching a car accident happen in slow motion and did not want to miss the impact. "Mom? Dad?" I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet room. I pushed past Mr. Henderson, muttering a confused apology. I moved into the living room, the crowd parting slightly to let me through, but nobody touched me. Usually, at a party, people reach out. They touch your arm. They hug you. Here, they pulled back. They recoiled as if I were contagious. I saw my parents. My father was standing by the fireplace, the focal point of the room. He was wearing his navy suit, the one he wore when he had to fire someone or give a speech at the Rotary Club. He looked tall and imposing, his silver hair brushed back perfectly, but he was not looking at me with the warmth of a father seeing his daughter on her birthday. He was looking at me with a flat, detached assessment. In his hands, he held a thick manila folder. He was gripping it so tightly that his knuckles were white. It did not look like a birthday card. It looked like a script. My mother was seated in the wingback chair to his right. She was wearing her Sunday pearls and a stiff blue dress. She was looking at the carpet. She was staring at a spot near the coffee table with intense fascination, refusing to lift her head. Her hands were clasped in her lap, twisting a handkerchief over and over again. "What is going on?" I asked. I tried to laugh, but it sounded jagged. "Is this an intervention? Did I forget to pay a parking ticket?" My attempt at humor died in the air. Nobody laughed. My father cleared his throat. It was a sharp, authoritative sound that made the room go even quieter, if that was possible. "Hello, Riley," he said. He did not say happy birthday. He did not say sweetheart. He said my name like it was a data point he was verifying. My stomach dropped. It was a physical sensation, like the elevator cable snapping. I looked around the room again, really looking this time. I saw the faces of the people I had grown up with. Mrs. Baker, who used to give me cookies, Coach Miller, who taught me how to swim. They were not looking at me with affection. They were looking at me with judgment. They looked like a jury that had already made up its mind. The vibe was not celebration. It was accountability. I felt a flush of heat rise up my neck. I felt exposed, though I was fully dressed. I tightened my grip on the wine bottle, the glass biting into my palm. I suddenly felt foolish for bringing it, a $12 bottle of wine at a trial. "Dad," I said, my voice trembling, "why is everyone here?" He did not answer immediately. He just tapped the folder against his other hand. Tap, tap, tap. I scanned the edges of the room, looking for an exit, looking for a friendly face, looking for anything that made sense. My eyes swept over the crowded dining room, past the china cabinet, past the sliding glass doors that led to the deck, and then I stopped. There was a woman standing in the back corner, near the entrance to the hallway. She did not belong here. Everyone else in the room I could place. They were part of the fabric of Haven Ridge. They wore comfortable sweaters and khakis. They looked like suburban Pennsylvania. But this woman was different. She was wearing a charcoal gray suit that was tailored within an inch of its life. Her hair was pulled back in a severe architectural bun. She was holding a leather briefcase, not a purse. She was not looking at my father. She was not looking at the floor. She was looking directly at me. Her expression was unreadable. It was not pity, and it was not judgment. It was professional intensity. She was watching the room the way a security guard watches a bank lobby. She was assessing threats. She was calculating angles. I had never seen her before in my life. My father took a step forward, away from the fireplace. The movement drew my eyes back to him. The room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in. The 70 people in the room held their breath in unison. The air grew thin. I looked at the folder in my father's hands. I looked at my mother, who still refused to acknowledge I was in the room. I looked back at the woman in the gray suit, who gave me the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. I realized then that the wine bottle was heavy. I realized that I was still wearing my coat. I realized that the birthday dinner was a lie. "We have gathered everyone here," my father began, his voice booming slightly, projected for the back of the room, "because we believe in the truth, and we believe that the truth should be witnessed." He opened the folder. The sound of the paper turning was the loudest thing in the world. I stood there, frozen, the garage smell still lingering on my clothes, realizing too late that I had walked into a trap. I was not the guest of honor. I was the defendant, and the trial had already started before I even walked through the door. "We have done enough," my father said. He did not shout it. He did not say it with rage. He said it with the exhausted, patient tone of a man who has been carrying a heavy box for too long and has finally decided to set it down. He looked around the room, making eye contact with the neighbors and the church elders, silently inviting them to agree with him. It was a performance of burden. He was showing them the weight he had carried, so they would understand why he was about to drop it. "We have always been people of accountability," he continued, turning his gaze back to me. "We believe in paying our debts. We believe in honesty, and we believe that when a contract is void, it is time to close the account." I stood there, clutching the neck of the wine bottle so hard my fingers were going numb. The word contract hung in the air, foreign and sharp. I wanted to ask him what he was talking about. I wanted to ask why 70 people were standing in our living room like a silent jury, but my throat felt like it was stuffed with cotton. He took a step toward me and extended the manila folder. He held it out not like a gift, but like a subpoena. "Take it," he said. I reached out. My hand was shaking. I took the folder. It was heavy, thick with paper. I opened it. The first page was not a letter. It was not a card. It was a spreadsheet. It was printed in landscape mode, the font small and precise. The header at the top read, "Riley Costs, 1996 to present." I blinked, trying to make the rows of black text resolve into something that made sense. I saw dates. I saw categories. I saw dollar amounts. August, 1996, diapers and formula, $85. September, 1996, pediatric checkup copay, $20. March, 2004, ER visit, fractured wrist, $500. June, 2010, 8th grade field trip to Washington, D.C., $350. October, 2012, orthodontics, phase 1, $2,000, $400. My eyes scanned down the page, skimming over a lifetime of existence that had been reduced to a ledger. Every birthday check I had ever received was listed as a debit. The prom dress I bought at the mall was there. The used Honda Civic they helped me buy for college was there, listed with a note about the interest rate they could have earned if that money had remained in their savings account. It went on for pages. 30 years of food, clothing, shelter, medical care, and education, all tallied up in neat, unforgiving columns. "This is what we invested," my father said. His voice was steady, factual. "We kept track. We wanted to be sure that we were doing our duty. We wanted to be sure we were providing, and we did. We provided everything." He paused, letting the silence settle over the room. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I could hear the breathing of the people standing closest to me. They were leaning in, looking at the papers in my hand with a mix of fascination and horror. "Look at the total on the last page," he said. I flipped to the back. The number was bolded. It was a staggering sum, Hundreds of thousands of dollars. That is the cost of raising you, he said. That is what we put in. I looked up at him. I felt sick. A deep, churning nausea that started in my stomach and radiated out to my fingertips. Dad, I whispered, why do you have this? Why did you write this down? Because facts matter, he said simply. And the fact is, we have paid our dues. We have fulfilled our obligation. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a second document. It was a single sheet of paper, clipped to a glossy report from a laboratory. And this, he said, is why the obligation is over. He slid the paper on top of the spreadsheet in my hands. It was a DNA test report. I recognized the logo of the company. They were one of the big ones, the kind you see advertised on television. My eyes went straight to the summary box in the center of the page. The summary box was brutal. 0% for paternity, 0% for maternity. I read it twice, then a third time. The words swam before my eyes. 0%. Not low probability, not inconclusive, 0. We received these results 3 weeks ago, my father said. He spoke as if he were reading a weather report. We ran the test because we had suspicions. There were inconsistencies, traits that did not match, so we checked. He looked at the crowd, addressing them now. We raised a stranger for 30 years. We poured our resources, our time, and our home into a child who does not belong to us. The room seemed to tilt. I felt like I was standing on the deck of a ship in a storm. I looked at my mother. She was still sitting in the wingback chair, her hands twisting that handkerchief. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. "Mom?" I said. My voice cracked. "Mom, please." She finally looked up. Her eyes were dry. There were no tears. There was only a cold, hard resolve. "The hospital made a mistake," she said. Her voice was thin, but it carried to every corner of the room. "They gave us the wrong baby. We raised someone else's child. We did our best. Riley, we tried, but we are done pretending." Done pretending. The words hit me harder than the spreadsheet, harder than the DNA results. Done pretending implied that the last 30 years had been an act. It implied that every time she made me soup when I was sick, every time she sat in the front row of my school plays, every time she told me she was proud of me. She was just playing a role. She was just waiting for the curtain to fall. I looked down at the spreadsheet again. The date on the first entry was 1996. My mind snagged on a detail that did not make sense. I tried to push it away, but it stuck there, sharp and insistent. If they only found out 3 weeks ago, why did they have receipts from 30 years ago? Who keeps a receipt for a pediatric copay from 1996 unless they are planning to use it? Who logs the cost of a 4th grade field trip unless they are building a case? Normal parents do not itemize their children. They do not look at a broken arm and see a $500 loss. They see a hurt child. They see fear. They do not see a line item on a budget. I looked at the neighbors. Mrs. Gable was staring at her shoes. Mr. Henderson was nodding slowly, as if this all made perfect financial sense. They knew, somehow, looking at their faces. I realized that my parents had spun this story to them before I arrived. They had painted themselves as the victims of a great fraud. They had convinced this room full of people that I was the imposition, that I was the error that needed to be corrected. They were not here to celebrate my birthday. They were here to witness my return. It was like returning a defective appliance to the store. They wanted witnesses to prove they had brought me back. "We are not unreasonable people," my father said. He was back in his business mode now, the mode he used when he was negotiating a settlement. "We understand that this is difficult, but we also understand that we have been defrauded. Not by you, perhaps, but by the circumstances, and we cannot continue to invest in a mistake." He reached into the folder I was holding and pulled out one last document. It was stapled and had a line for a signature at the bottom. "This is a release," he said. It states that you acknowledge the results of the DNA test. It states that you acknowledge that we have provided for you up to the age of majority and beyond. It waives your right to any future claim on our estate, our assets, or our support. It also waives your right to sue us or the hospital on our behalf. He held out a pen, a nice pen, a Mont Blanc. We are willing to call the debt settled, he said, gesturing to the spreadsheet. We are not asking for repayment of the $300,000. We are simply asking for a clean break. Sign this, and we go our separate ways. No debt, no strings. I looked at the pen, then I looked at the spreadsheet. Emergency room. Fractured wrist. $500. I remembered that day. I fell off the swing set in the backyard. I remembered crying because it hurt so much. I remembered my father driving me to the hospital. I remembered him being angry in the waiting room, complaining about the wait time. I thought he was just stressed. I thought he was worried about me. Now I knew. He was not worried about my wrist. He was annoyed about the $500. He was annoyed that the investment was requiring maintenance. And if I don't sign? I asked. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, calm, detached. Then we will pursue the debt, my father said. We have the records. We have the proof of every cent we spent on you after you turned 18. We will sue you for unjust enrichment, and we will win. He checked his watch. You have 1 hour, he said. He did not say to decide. He said to leave. 1 hour to gather anything that is personally yours, he clarified. Clothes, toiletries, anything we bought for the house stays, anything we bought for you as a gift. He used air quotes around the word gift. We are willing to let you take, as a gesture of goodwill. My mother stood up then. She smoothed down the front of her dress. She walked past me without looking at my face. She went to the front hallway closet and opened the door. She pulled out a bag. It was my old duffel bag from high school track. It was faded blue with a yellow zipper. It was dusty. She walked over and dropped it at my feet. I packed for you, she said. I put in your clothes from the dresser. I put in your coat. You do not need to go upstairs. I stared at the bag. It was not very big. It was slumped on the floor, pathetic and small. She had packed it before I even got here. She had gone into the room that used to be mine, opened the drawers, and removed the evidence of my existence. She had probably done it this morning, while I was at work, while I was thinking about the bottle of wine and the black dog on the label. She did not want me to go upstairs because she did not want me to see how empty the room already was. She had already erased me. 1 hour, my father repeated. The clock is ticking. Riley. The room was so quiet, I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Tick, tock, tick, tock. I looked at the crowd again. Faces I had known my whole life. People who had given me candy on Halloween. People who had sat behind us in church. They were all complicit. They were all part of this. They had come here to watch a family excise a tumor. And I was the tumor. I felt a sudden, violent urge to scream. I wanted to throw the wine bottle through the sliding glass door. I wanted to tear the spreadsheet into confetti and throw it in my father's face, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't move. I was paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. It was too big to fight. It was like trying to fight a landslide. I looked at the spreadsheet one last time. November, 1999. Preschool tuition. $400. They had kept the receipt for preschool. They had been planning this since I was a toddler. Maybe not the DNA part, but the accounting. They had always looked at me and seen a cost. They had always been keeping score. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. It was hot and angry. I wiped it away quickly. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. You want me to sign? I asked, looking my father in the eye. It is the only logical choice, he said. I looked at the release form. I looked at the line where my name was supposed to go, and then I looked at the back of the room. The woman in the gray suit was still there. She had moved slightly. She was now standing a few feet closer to the center of the room. Her eyes weren't on my father. They were locked on the spreadsheet in my hand. and for the first time, her expression had changed. She looked angry. Not the explosive anger of a parent yelling at a child. It was a cold, professional fury. It was the look of a predator who has just seen prey make a fatal mistake. My father followed my gaze. He frowned, noticing her for the first time as something other than background noise. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice sharp. "I didn't invite you." The woman stepped forward. The crowd parted for her instantly, sensing the authority radiating off her like heat. She did not answer him immediately. She walked until she was standing right next to me. She smelled like expensive soap and crisp paper. She looked at the spreadsheet in my hand. Then she looked at the DNA results. Then she looked at the release form. She reached out and gently took the pen from my hand. She clicked the cap back on. "Don't sign that," she said. Her voice was low, meant only for me. Then she turned to face my father. "You gave her 1 hour," the woman said. Her voice was clear, ringing through the silent house. "That was generous, but I think you are going to need a lot more time than that." My father bristled. "This is a private family matter. You need to leave." It stopped being a private family matter the moment you handed her a fraudulent contract in front of 70 witnesses, the woman said. She dropped her briefcase onto the dining room table with a heavy thud. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "My name is Marianne Locke," she said. "I am an attorney. And unless you want this birthday party to turn into a crime scene investigation, I suggest you stop talking about money and start listening." I looked at my mother. Her face had gone pale. The hand twisting the handkerchief had stopped. I looked down at the duffel bag at my feet. I realized then that I wasn't leaving in an hour. Not the way they thought I was. I wasn't being returned. I was being rescued, but I didn't know it yet. All I knew was that the air in the room had shifted again. The judgment was no longer pointed at me. It was pivoting, slowly, like a heavy gun turret, toward the man standing by the fireplace. The silence in the room was absolute. It was not the stunned silence of a surprise party anymore. It was the vacuum that follows an explosion. Marianne Locke stood between me and my father like a steel beam driven into the floorboards. She was not tall, certainly not as tall as my father, but she occupied the space with a density that made him look suddenly insubstantial. She did not look at the crowd. She did not look at my mother, who had gone the color of old parchment. Marianne looked only at my father. Her eyes locked on his face with a terrifying, clinical focus. "Who are you?" my father repeated. His voice had lost its booming, theatrical quality. It was tighter now, edged with a frantic energy that I had never heard before. He took a half-step toward her, an instinctive attempt to use his physical size to intimidate. A tactic that had worked on me for 30 years. Marianne did not flinch. She did not even blink. "I told you," she said, her tone level and cool, distinct from the heated atmosphere of the room. "My name is Marianne Locke. I am the executor for the estate of Celia Harrow." The name hung in the air. Celia Harrow. I searched my memory, scanning through decades of family friends, business associates, distant relatives. The name meant nothing to me. It was a blank space. I looked at my mother to see if it registered with her, and I saw her hand spasm on the arm of the chair. She knew the name. The recognition on her face was instant and terrified. "I don't know who that is." My father lied. It was a clumsy lie. He was too quick with it. "And I don't know what you think you are doing crashing a private family gathering, but you are trespassing. I want you out of my house, now." He pointed a shaking finger toward the garage door. Marianne smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a chess player who sees mate in two. "I am not trespassing," she said. "I am following the trail of a federally regulated investigation, and before you try to bully your daughter into signing that piece of paper, you should know that you are already on record." My father scoffed. It was a loud, wet sound. "On record? What are you talking about? This is a birthday dinner. We are settling a family debt. You are attempting to coerce a signature on a retroactive liability waiver," Marianne corrected him. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was not a spreadsheet. It was a photocopy of a bank document. And you are doing it because you know that as of 8 o'clock this morning, the fraud alerts on the accounts you opened in Riley's name have been triggered. My father froze. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Report number 4922 Alpha 7, Marianne recited. She did not look at the paper. She looked right at him. Suspicious activity report filed with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Attempted wire transfer of $45,000 from a custodial account listed under the name Riley Adams, initiated by a third party with a distinct IP address matching this residence. The room behind me erupted into a low, buzzing murmur. I heard Mrs. Gable gasp. I heard the shuffle of feet as people instinctively moved back, putting distance between themselves and my parents. "That is ridiculous," my father sputtered, but his face was turning a dangerous shade of red. "I manage Riley's finances. I have always helped her. She is terrible with money. Ask her. I handle everything. She is 30 years old," Marianne said. "She is not a child, and the signature on the authorization form was not hers." Marianne turned to me then. "Riley, did you authorize a transfer of $45,000 last Tuesday?" I shook my head. My voice stuck in my throat. "I don't even have $45,000, I whispered. "I have $6,000 in savings and a checking account that I use for rent." Marianne turned back to my father. "She doesn't have it," she said, "but the identity you built for her does. Or rather, the credit lines you opened using her social security number do." My father looked at the crowd. He was losing them. I could feel the shift in the room's energy. 5 minutes ago, they were a jury ready to convict me of being a burden. They were ready to nod along as my father explained how much I had cost him. But the mention of bank fraud, the specific recitation of that report number, had shattered the illusion. These were suburban people. They understood debt. They understood disappointment. But they also understood the law. And they knew that you do not get visited by a lawyer in a charcoal suit unless you have done something very, very wrong. "You are twisting things," my father said, his voice rising, becoming shrill. "We are the victims here. Look at the DNA. We raised a stranger. We are just trying to recoup our losses." He waved the spreadsheet at her. The paper rattled. Marianne stepped forward and plucked the spreadsheet from his hand. She did it so fast he didn't have time to react. She glanced at it for a second, her expression one of utter disdain. "This," she said, holding up the ledger of my life, "is legally meaningless. It is a prop. In the state of Pennsylvania, parents have a legal obligation to provide necessaries for a minor child. You cannot bill a child for food. You cannot bill a child for shelter. You cannot retroactively charge interest on a childhood. This document is not a bill. Mr. Adams, it is a confession of financial abuse." She let the paper drop to the floor. It fluttered down and landed near my muddy boots. "And that release you want her to sign?" Marianne pointed to the document still resting on the table next to the Mont Blanc pen. "That is not to set her free. That is a general release of liability. If she signs that, she waives her right to sue you for identity theft. She waives her right to sue you for the misappropriation of the trust funds you have been draining for a decade. You aren't kicking her out because she isn't your daughter. You are kicking her out because she is turning 30, and you know the trust meant for the real granddaughter, or the person holding that identity, was set to mature today." My mother made a sound then. It was a high, thin keen, like a wounded animal. She put her hands over her face. "Stop it," my mother sobbed. "Please, just stop." "I will not stop," Marianne said, "because you didn't stop. You didn't stop when you found out she wasn't yours. You didn't stop when you decided to use her identity to refinance this house. You didn't stop when you invited 70 people here to humiliate her into silence." Marianne turned to the crowd. She raised her voice, not shouting, but projecting with the clarity of a bell. "You were all invited here to witness a tragedy," she said to the neighbors. You were told that these good people were burdened by an ungrateful child, but you were actually invited to be accessories. You were brought here to pressure a young woman into signing away her rights so that these two could avoid prison. The murmuring grew louder. I saw Mr. Henderson, the accountant, check his watch and then quietly slip out the back door leading to the deck. He knew, he had to know, and he was running. I looked at my father. He was deflated. The bluster was gone. He looked old and small and terrified. He was looking at the release form on the table as if it were a life raft that had drifted just out of reach. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. The crushing weight of the last hour was lifting, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. They had staged a courtroom. That is exactly what this was. The rows of people, the presentation of evidence, the demand for a signature. They wanted a summary judgment. They wanted to convict me of being a mistake before I even knew what the charges were. But they had been arrogant. They thought they were the only ones with evidence. They thought that because they had created me, they owned the narrative. Marianne turned to me. The hard lines of her face softened. She stepped closer, invading my personal space in a way that felt protective, not threatening. She lowered her voice so that, for a moment, it felt like we were the only two people in the room. "Riley," she said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. You were not a mistake." I looked at her, confused. "But the DNA is real," she said. "You are not their biological daughter, but you were not an accident. Children don't just get swapped and then accidentally funded by hidden trusts. Someone made decisions about you. Someone decided who you would be and where you would go. And those decisions were not accidents. They were transactions." My breath caught in my throat. Transactions. "I am here representing the estate of Celia Harrow," Marianne said. "She was your grandmother, your biological grandmother. And she spent the last 10 years of her life trying to find out what happened to the baby her daughter lost." "Lost?" I whispered. "We will get to that," Marianne said. "But right now, we need to leave. You cannot stay in this house." She turned back to my father. "We are leaving," she announced. "Riley is taking her personal effects. She is taking her car, which is titled in her name, regardless of who paid for it, and if you attempt to stop her, or if you attempt to access any of the accounts linked to her Social Security number after we walk out that door, I will have the federal marshals here before you can finish dialing the bank." My father did not move. He stared at the floor where the spreadsheet lay. "You can't prove we knew," he muttered. It was a weak defense, a last-ditch effort to salvage some shred of deniability. "We just found out. The test. We will let the forensic accountants decide what you knew and when you knew it," Marianne said. "But considering the settlement check from the hospital was cashed in 1997, I think you are going to have a hard time selling the ignorance plea." 1997. I looked at my mother. She was rocking back and forth in the chair now. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the wall. They knew. They had known almost the whole time. The realization washed over me like ice water. The ledger, the receipts. They weren't tracking the cost of raising a child. They were tracking the expenses of a project. I wasn't a daughter. I was an asset. I was a place to park money and a cover story for a settlement they had already spent. I looked at the crowd one last time. They looked ashamed. They should be. They had come here to watch a spectacle, and they had gotten one. Just not the one they expected. They were looking at my parents with a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. The illusion of the perfect family in the perfect house had shattered, revealing the rot underneath. "Let's go," Marianne said, touching my elbow gently. I nodded. I reached down and picked up my duffel bag. It was light. It contained nothing of value because nothing in this house had ever really belonged to me. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't look at my father. I didn't ask my mother for an explanation. There was nothing left to say. The spreadsheet on the floor said it all. I turned and walked toward the door, the sound of my boots heavy on the hardwood. Marianne walked beside me, her briefcase swinging in rhythm with my steps. We walked past the silent neighbors, past the shocked church friends, past the table where the birthday cake sat uncut and forgotten. We walked out of the kitchen and into the garage. The smell of oil and old paint hit me again, but this time it didn't smell like home. It smelled like a crime scene. As we stepped out into the cool night air, leaving the house and the 70 witnesses behind, I realized something. My parents had wanted a trial. They had set the stage, called the jury, and prepared the evidence, but they had forgotten the most important rule of the courtroom. Never ask a question if you don't already know the answer, and never, ever invite a lawyer to a party unless you are sure she's on your side. I walked out of the house like a ghost leaving a graveyard. There was no grand exit. I did not turn around to spit on the driveway or throw the wine bottle through the living room window. I did not scream at the neighbors who were peeking through their blinds, watching the aftermath of the spectacle. I just walked. My legs moved in a mechanical rhythm, left, right, carrying a body that felt suddenly too heavy to be my own. Marianne had walked me to my car. She had pressed a business card into my hand, her grip firm and grounding, and told me to go somewhere neutral. She said she had calls to make. She said she would handle the fallout. I just nodded. I was not capable of speech. I felt like I had been hollowed out with a scoop, leaving only a thin shell of skin to hold my shape. I got into my car. The engine started with a familiar rumble that felt offensive in its normalcy. I backed out of the driveway, past the line of cars belonging to the witnesses, and drove away from the only home I had ever known. I drove for 20 minutes without knowing where I was going. I just followed the white lines on the asphalt, letting the road dictate my path. I ended up on Route 22, a stretch of highway lined with car dealerships, strip malls, and chain restaurants. It was the landscape of generic America, ugly and comforting in its predictability. I pulled into the parking lot of an IHOP. The blue roof was beaming under the streetlights like a beacon for the lost and the hungry. I did not know why I chose it. Maybe because it was open. Maybe because it was the kind of place where no one looked at you, where everyone was nursing some kind of hangover or heartache. I walked inside. The air smelled of artificial maple syrup and stale coffee. It was bright, aggressively bright. The fluorescent lights hummed with a low-grade headache frequency. A hostess with purple braces smiled at me. "Just one?" she asked. "Just one?" I said. My voice sounded rusty. She led me to a booth in the back, away from the few other diners. I sat down on the sticky vinyl seat. I kept my coat on. I kept my bag next to me. I felt like a fugitive stopping for supplies. A waitress named Brenda came over. She looked tired. She had a pen tucked behind her ear and a pot of coffee in her hand. "Coffee?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Black? And I want to order." I looked at the laminated menu. The pictures were brightly colored and absurd stacks of pancakes topped with whipped cream mountains, eggs smiling next to bacon strips. It was a menu designed for children and drunk people. "I'll have the Rooty Tooty Fresh and Fruity," I said. I heard myself say it. Rooty Tooty Fresh and Fruity. The words felt ridiculous in my mouth. I had just found out my parents were not my parents, that my life was a lie, and that I was the victim of a 30-year fraud. And here I was, ordering a breakfast combo with a rhyming name. Brenda did not blink. She just wrote it down. "Bacon or sausage?" "Bacon," I said. "Extra crispy." When she walked away, the absurdity of it hit me. A laugh bubbled up in my chest, but it caught in my throat and turned into a dry heave. I put my head in my hands. I sat there for a long time, breathing in the syrup smell, trying to force my heart to beat at a normal rhythm. I looked at the bag I had carried in. The folder was inside. My father had handed it to me, and in the chaos, I had kept it. Marianne had taken the spreadsheet, but I still had the rest. I pulled the folder out. It was thick. It felt radioactive. I pushed the silverware roll aside and opened it on the table. The DNA results were on top. Probability of paternity, 0%. Probability of maternity, 0%. I traced the numbers with my finger. 0%. It was such a clean, absolute number. It meant nothing. It meant there was no biological thread connecting me to the people who had taught me to tie my shoes. I looked at the date on the report. It was from 3 weeks ago. I closed my eyes. I tried to reconcile the paper with my memory. I remembered my father teaching me to ride a bike. I remembered him running behind me, holding the seat, shouting encouragement. I remembered my mother making me chicken soup when I had the flu, checking my forehead with her cool hand. Those things happened. The memories were real. But the people in them were strangers. It was like watching a home movie and realizing all the actors were hired hands. I flipped the page. Underneath the DNA results, there were other papers, documents my father had not waved in the air. Documents he had perhaps forgotten were in there. Or maybe he was so arrogant he thought I would never look. There were copies of old hospital correspondence, letters on letterhead from Lake Briar Medical Center. They were dated from 1996 and 1997. They were vague, bureaucratic letters about quality assurance reviews and patient file audits. Then I found the envelope. It was a standard white envelope, sealed. But the glue had yellowed and dried over time. It was addressed to my father, Mr. Robert Adams, at our old address on Elm Street. The postmark was June 12th, 1998. I hesitated. Opening it felt like crossing a final line. It felt like violating a privacy I no longer had the right to. But then I remembered the spreadsheet. I remembered the way he looked at me in the living room, like I was a bad investment he was liquidating. I jammed my thumb under the flap and tore it open. Inside was a single document. It was a legal settlement notice. It was stamped confidential in red ink across the top. Release and settlement agreement. I read the legal jargon, my eyes skimming over the whereas clauses until I hit the meat of the paragraph. In consideration of the sum of $250,000, receipt of which is hereby acknowledged, Robert and Linda Adams do hereby release and forever discharge Lake Briar Medical Center from any and all claims, demands, damages, actions, causes of action, or suits of any kind or nature whatsoever, and particularly on account of all injuries, known and unknown, both to person and property, which have resulted or may in the future develop from an accident which occurred on or about the 14th day of October, 1996, specifically regarding the infant identification error concerning the minor child known as Riley Adams. The world stopped. The background noise of the IHOP, the clatter of silverware, the sizzling of the grill, the low murmur of conversation fell away. All I could hear was the rushing of blood in my ears. 1998. I was 2 years old. They knew. They did not just find out 3 weeks ago. They did not just get suspicious because I didn't have my father's chin or my mother's eyes. They knew when I was a toddler. They knew I was not theirs. They knew there had been a switch, and they took money for it. $250,000. I stared at the number. In 1998. It was a fortune. Enough to buy a house, enough to start a business. That was enough to buy a house. That was enough to start a business. They had accepted $250,000 to keep me, to keep the secret, to keep playing house with a child they knew didn't belong to them. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to grip the edge of the table. This wasn't about love. It wasn't about them raising me as their own, out of the goodness of their hearts. It was a transaction. They were paid to be my parents. I was a job. I was a contract they had fulfilled. Brenda arrived with the pancakes. She set the plate down with a cheerful clatter. Rooty tooty, fresh and fruity. Enjoy. Hun. I stared at the pancakes. They were topped with a violently red strawberry compote and a mountain of whipped cream. They looked grotesque. I managed a quiet, "Thank you," barely louder than my breath. She left. I did not touch the fork. I looked back at the document. There was a confidentiality clause. Of course there was. Parties agree to maintain strict confidentiality regarding the terms of this settlement and the underlying facts. That was why they had never told me. That was why they had kept the receipts. They were legally bound to silence, but they were also financially incentivized to keep me until I was an adult. If they had given me back, or if they had revealed the truth, they might have had to give the money back, or worse. face fraud charges if they had spent it. I thought about the investment spreadsheet my father had shown me. The audacity of it was breathtaking. He had taken $250,000 to raise me, and then he had the nerve to track every penny he spent on me, as if he were losing money on the deal. He was double-dipping. He got paid to take the job, and then he wanted to bill the client for expenses. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. My hands were trembling so bad I dropped it on the table. It landed with a thud next to the strawberry syrup. I picked it up and unlocked it. I needed to see. Marianne had mentioned bank fraud. She had mentioned accounts. I opened a credit monitoring app I had downloaded years ago but rarely checked because my credit had always been strangely perfect. I logged in. It took a moment to load. The little circle spinning and spinning. Then the dashboard popped up. Total debt. $412,000. I gasped. A sharp intake of breath that sounded like a sob. $412,000. I scrolled down. Mortgage loan. $180,000. Opened 2015. Small business loan. $150,000. Opened 2018. Personal line of credit. $50,000. Opened 2020. Credit card. $32,000. Opened 2022. I clicked on the mortgage loan. The address listed was my parents' house in Haven Ridge, the house they claimed they had invested in for me. They had refinanced it in my name. I clicked on the small business loan. It was for Adams Consulting, my father's shell company that never seemed to actually consult on anything. I clicked on the credit card. The transaction history was a litany of their lifestyle. Home Depot, Best Buy, Carnival Cruise Line, the Country Club of Haven Ridge. They had been using me for years. They stole my identity before I even knew what an identity was. They used my social security number to fund their renovations, their vacations, their life. That was why my father always insisted on helping me with my taxes. That was why he always told me to let him handle the complicated financial stuff. He wasn't being a helpful dad. He was being a careful criminal. He was managing the cover-up. I put the phone down. I felt cold, freezing cold. This was not just rejection. Rejection is emotional. Rejection is, we don't love you anymore. This was strategy. This was a long con. They had kept me, raised me, fed me, and clothed me. Not because they loved me, but because I was a financial asset. I was a shield. I was a signatory. And the reason they did this now? The reason they staged this birthday intervention? Because I turned 30, I remembered something vaguely about trust funds. Marianne had mentioned a trust. Trusts often have distribution clauses based on age, 21, 25, 30. If there was a trust for my biological family, this Celia Harrow person, and if it was set to pay out when I turned 30, my parents must have known. They must have been terrified that I would get access to money they couldn't control. Or maybe they needed me to sign that release so they could claim I had gifted them the proceeds. They tried to discard me before I could find out I was worth anything. They tried to get me to sign a waiver that would protect them from the inevitable discovery of the $500,000 of debt they had hung around my neck. I looked at the pancakes again. The whipped cream was melting, sliding down the side of the stack in a slow white avalanche. I picked up the fork. I cut a piece of the pancake. I put it in my mouth. It tasted like sugar and cardboard. I chewed it. I swallowed it. I needed the calories. I was going to war. My phone buzzed on the table. I jumped. I looked at the screen. It was a text message from a number I didn't have saved, but I knew who it was. From unknown number body. Don't sign anything. Don't talk to them. I have the files. We have leverage. Go to sleep. Riley. Tomorrow. We talk. It was Marianne. I stared at the message. We have leverage. I wasn't alone. For the first time all night, the crushing loneliness lifted just a fraction of an inch. I had an ally, and I had the folder. I looked around the IHOP. A trucker was eating eggs at the counter. A couple was arguing in hushed tones in the corner. Brenda was refilling the coffee pot. It was all so normal, and I was sitting there with the evidence of a 30-year crime spree spread out next to my breakfast. I took another bite of the pancake. I wasn't going to cry. I was done crying. Crying was for daughters who had lost their parents. I hadn't lost parents. I had lost handlers. I had escaped captors. I finished the pancake. I paid the bill with my debit card. The only card I knew for a fact was actually mine, and I left a $20 tip for Brenda. I walked back out to my car. The air on Route 22 was filled with exhaust fumes and the smell of distant rain. I got in, locked the doors, and put the folder on the passenger seat. I buckled it in with the seatbelt. It was the most valuable passenger I had ever carried. I started the car and drove toward the cheap motel I had passed 3 miles back. I was going to sleep, and tomorrow I was going to meet Marianne Locke, and I was going to learn how to burn a house down using nothing but paper. The drive to Ashfield, Maryland, took 3 hours. I spent most of it staring out the passenger window of Marianne's Audi, watching the landscape shift from the industrial gray of the highway to the rolling, verdant green of horse country. The fences here were wood, not chain link. The driveways were long and winding, disappearing into groves of oak and maple. It was a different world, heavy with a kind of quiet, established money that does not need to shout to be heard. My stomach was a knot of cold anxiety. I was wearing the same clothes I had worn to the birthday dinner, jeans and a sweater that felt grimy after a night in a motel bed. I felt like an intruder before we even arrived. I felt like a fraud. Marianne did not play music. She drove with a calm, predatory efficiency. Every few miles, she would glance at me, checking my state of mind like she was monitoring a volatile chemical reaction. "They are good people," she said, breaking the silence as we crossed the state line. "But they are grieving. You need to be prepared for that. They are not just meeting a daughter. They are meeting a ghost." I did not ask what she meant. I was too afraid of the answer. We pulled up to the house just before noon. It was a sprawling, red brick colonial set back from the road, framed by trees that looked like they had been standing since the Civil War. It was not flashy. There were no marble fountains or gold leaf gates. It just looked solid. It looked permanent. It was the kind of house that made you realize how temporary everything else in your life had been. Marianne parked the car on the gravel circular drive. The sound of the stones crunching under the tires was the only noise for miles. "Ready?" she asked. "No," I said. "Good," she replied, unbuckling her seatbelt. "That means you are paying attention." We walked to the front door. It was black, lacquered, with a brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. Before I could reach for it, the door opened. A woman stood there. She was tall, wearing a cashmere cardigan and dark slacks. Her hair was silver, pulled back loosely. I stopped breathing. I was looking at my own eyes. I was looking at the structure of my own jawline, softened by age but unmistakably the same. It was like looking into a mirror that showed me 30 years in the future. "Riley," she whispered. She did not rush forward to hug me. She did not scream. She stood very still, her hands trembling slightly at her sides, as if she were afraid that if she moved too fast, I would dissolve into mist. "Hello," I said. My voice was a croak. A man appeared behind her. He was wearing a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He had the same dark eyebrows I had spent years plucking into shape. He looked at me with an intensity that felt physical, a hunger that was terrifying in its rawness. "Please," the woman said, stepping back and opening the door wider. "Come in, please." They were treating me like a wild animal that had wandered into their living room, something rare and dangerous that needed to be handled with extreme caution. We sat in a sunroom at the back of the house. The furniture was upholstered in soft, floral patterns. There were books everywhere. It smelled of beeswax and lemon oil. A tea service had been set out on a low table. Delicate porcelain cups, a silver pot, a plate of shortbread cookies. It was so civilized, so painfully polite, that I wanted to scream. "I am Eleanor," the woman said. "And this is David." "The Harrows," I said, nodding. "Marianne told me." "We are your parents," David said. He said it simply. without the aggressive ownership my other father, had used. He said it like he was stating a fact that surprised even him. I picked up a teacup just to have something to do with my hands. The china was so thin I could almost see the shadow of my fingers through it. I don't know what to say, I admitted. I don't know how to do this. Neither do we, Eleanor said. She was watching me drink the tea. She was watching the way I held the cup. She was cataloging every movement. We only found out about the switch 2 months ago. The DNA test, I said. David nodded. It wasn't something we were looking for. We didn't suspect. We trusted the hospital. We trusted the world. He looked out the window at the sprawling lawn. We had a daughter. Her name was Natalie. The word hung in the air, sharp and final. Natalie was sick, Eleanor said softly. She had a congenital heart condition. We fought it for 29 years. She was in and out of hospitals her whole life. She was brave. She was so incredibly brave. She paused, her voice catching. David reached out and covered her hand with his. She passed away last October, David said. We were devastated. We are devastated. But after she died, the doctors wanted to run a comprehensive genetic panel. They wanted to understand the specific mutation that caused her condition. For research purposes, we agreed. We wanted her life to mean something for science. He looked at me, his eyes brimming with tears. The results came back 3 weeks later, he said. The genetic markers were impossible. They told us that biologically, Natalie could not have been our daughter. Both of us carry recessive traits that she didn't have. It was a genetic impossibility. I set the teacup down. It rattled against the saucer. So, you started looking, I said. We had to know, Eleanor said. We loved Natalie. She was our daughter in every way that matters. But if she wasn't ours biologically, that meant someone else was, I finished. Yes, she whispered. She reached for a leather-bound album on the table and slid it toward me. Open it, she said. I opened the book. It was full of photographs. The first page showed a baby, a smiling, chubby-cheeked baby with dark curls. I turned the page. A toddler on a swing set, a girl in a soccer uniform, a teenager in a prom dress. It was like looking at a parallel universe version of myself. Natalie didn't look exactly like me. Her hair was lighter, her style was different, but the resemblance was undeniable. We had the same nose, we had the same way of smiling. Slightly crooked on the left side, we had the same hands. I stared at a photo of Natalie blowing out candles on a cake. She looked happy. She looked loved. But she also looked frail. You could see the illness in the pallor of her skin, the thinness of her wrists. I felt a sudden, crushing wave of guilt. I was the healthy one. I was the one who had survived because I had been placed in the wrong crib. If I had stayed with the Harrows, would I have been the one with the heart condition? Or was it just bad luck? Was Natalie the victim of my biology? Or was she the victim of a cosmic error? She would have liked you, David said. She always wanted a sister. The sentence landed heavy in the room. They weren't just looking for a daughter. They were looking for a replacement. They were looking for a place to put all the love they had left over, all the grief that had nowhere to go. I am not her, I said. I had to say it. I had to draw the line before I drowned in their expectations. We know, Eleanor said quickly. We know that we don't expect you to be. We want to know you. We want to help you. Help me how? I asked. Marianne told us what happened, David said. His voice hardened. She told us about the Adamses. She told us they put you out on the street. They gave me an hour, I said. You can stay here, Eleanor said. We have plenty of room. We have a guest suite. You can stay as long as you like, forever, if you want. And we can help with everything else, David added. We can pay off your debts. We can get you a new car. We can pay for therapy. We know this is traumatic. We have the resources to make this easier. They were offering me everything. safety, security, a home. It was everything I had been terrified of losing 24 hours ago, but it felt wrong. It felt like a transaction. It felt like they were trying to buy closure. They were so careful, so polite, treating me like a porcelain doll that might shatter if they spoke too loudly. They were terrified I would vanish, so they were trying to anchor me with comfort. I looked at Marianne. She was sitting in a wingback chair in the corner, watching the exchange with a professional detachment. She hadn't spoken since we entered the room. "Why?" I asked her. She looked up. "Why what?" "Why did the Adamses do it now?" I asked. "If the Harrows only found out 2 months ago, and the Adamses have known since 1998, why did they blow up my life yesterday? Why the rush? Why the birthday deadline?" Marianne set her teacup down. She leaned forward, her elbows on her knees. The softness was gone from her face. The lawyer was back. "Because of Celia," she said. "My mother," David clarified. "Your grandmother." "Celia Harrow was a very sharp woman," Marianne said. "She passed away 10 years ago. She left a substantial estate, but she had a very specific clause in her will regarding her grandchildren. She established a trust," David said. "For Natalie." "Not for Natalie," Marianne corrected him. "The language of the trust was very specific. Celia was eccentric. She didn't trust names. She trusted blood. The trust was established for the biological issue of David and Eleanor Harrow. It was a generation-skipping transfer tax strategy. But it also meant that the beneficiary had to be a blood relative." I felt a chill run down my spine. "The trust was set to mature and distribute its principal on the beneficiary's 30th birthday," Marianne said. "My birthday. Yesterday." "The Adamses knew about the trust?" I asked. "They didn't just know about it," Marianne said. "They tried to access it." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a file. She slid it across the coffee table, past the photo album of the dead girl I had replaced. 3 months ago, a request was filed with the trustee," Marianne explained. "It was a request to dissolve the trust and transfer the assets to an account in Pennsylvania. It was accompanied by a notarized affidavit claiming that Riley Adams was the biological granddaughter of Celia Harrow and that the funds were needed for emergency medical expenses. They used my name," I said. "They forged your signature," Marianne said. "And they forged a letter from a doctor claiming you had the same heart condition Natalie had. They tried to use the tragedy of the girl who died to steal the inheritance of the girl who lived." "But the trustee rejected it?" David asked. He looked horrified. "The trustee flagged it," Marianne said, "because the trust required a DNA confirmation before distribution. That was Celia's final safeguard. She didn't trust anyone. When the request came in, the trustee demanded the test. That is what triggered the Adamses to panic." It all clicked into place. The timeline, the desperation, the sudden party that was actually a trial. The Adamses had known about the money for years. Maybe they had been planning this heist for a decade. They waited until I was almost 30. They tried to grab the cash before the deadline, but when the trustee demanded DNA, they knew the game was up. They knew the Harrows would find out. They knew that once the DNA results came out, the Harrows would come looking for me. And when they found me, the Adamses would be exposed as frauds who had taken hush money and then tried to steal a trust fund. So they tried to destroy me first. They tried to force me to sign a release waiving all claims against them. They tried to frame me as a burden so that when the Harrows found me, I would look like a mess, a disaster, someone ungrateful and broken. They wanted to discredit me before I could ever speak. They weren't just discarding me. They were trying to cut my throat legally before I realized I was holding a sword. "How much?" I asked. "How much is in the trust?" Marianne looked me in the eye. $2.4 million, she said. The room went silent. $2.4 million. My parents had itemized my dental bills. They had charged me for field trips. They had groaned about a $500 emergency room visit. And all the while, they were plotting to steal $2 million that belonged to me. I looked at David and Eleanor. They looked sick. They were wealthy people. But the sheer malice of the scheme, The cruelty of using a dead girl's medical history to steal money was beyond their comprehension. "We didn't know," Eleanor whispered. "We had no idea they were monsters." "They aren't monsters," I said. My voice was cold. I felt a strange, dark calm settling over me. Monsters are scary because they are irrational. These people aren't irrational. They are calculators. They are purely transactional. I stood up. I walked over to the window and looked out at the rolling green lawn. I saw a gardener working on a hedge in the distance. It was all so peaceful, so protected. "I can't stay here," I said. "What?" Eleanor stood up, panic rising in her voice. "Where will you go? You have nowhere." "I have a lot of places to go," I said. "I have $2.4 million, or I will, as soon as Marianne helps me file the paperwork." I turned back to face them. "I appreciate the offer," I said. "And I appreciate the tea. And I am so sorry about Natalie. I really am. But I can't be your daughter right now. I can't sleep in your guest room and let you look at me and see her. It's not fair to you. And it's not fair to me." "Riley, please," David said. "We just want to help." "If you want to help," I said, "then help me destroy them." David blinked. "Destroy who?" "The Adamses," I said. "They stole my identity. They stole 30 years of my life. They took a settlement in 1998, and they tried to steal my inheritance in 2026. I don't want therapy. I don't want a new car." I looked at Marianne. She was smiling again, that sharp, dangerous smile. "I want to audit them," I said. "I want to itemize them the way they itemized me. I want to take every single penny they have. I want to strip them down until they are standing in an empty room with nothing but a folder full of regrets." Marianne closed her briefcase. The snap of the latch was the most satisfying sound I had heard in days. "I think," Marianne said, "that can be arranged." I looked back at the Harrows. They looked frightened of me. Perhaps they should be. The girl who walked in here was a victim looking for a safe harbor. But the woman standing here now wasn't a victim. She was an heiress with a vengeance. "I will take a hotel in town," I said to them. "And I would like to get to know you, slowly, on my terms, but right now, I have work to do." I picked up my duffel bag. It felt lighter than ever. "Let's go." "Marianne," I said, "we have a lawsuit to file." The next 3 days were not spent in therapy or in the warm embrace of my new biological family. They were spent in a conference room at the Courtyard Marriott off the interstate, breathing in the smell of stale coffee and printer toner. Marianne Locke did not believe in taking breaks. She believed in momentum. We turned that generic hotel room into a war room, covering the beige walls with timelines, sticky notes, and photocopies of documents that smelled like dust and secrets. We started with Lake Briar Medical Center. It is amazing what you can find when you stop asking nicely and start demanding legally. Marianne filed a flurry of records requests, citing the initial fraud investigation and the identity theft statutes. The hospital administration, terrified of a public scandal involving a baby switch, started cooperating with a speed that suggested they were trying to outrun their own liability. We were looking for the mechanics of the error. How does a hospital switch 2 babies in 1996 without anyone noticing? The answer, we discovered, was that people did notice. They just didn't speak up. We combed through the shift logs from the maternity ward for October 14th. 1996, they were digitized now, scanned from old microfiche. But the anomalies were glaring if you knew where to look. There were missing sign-out sheets for the nursery. There were discharge papers where the timestamps had been manually altered with whiteout and a ballpoint pen. And there was one name that kept appearing in the internal email chains from that week. A nursing supervisor named Helen Vance, in the emails. The administrators were not discussing a mistake. They were discussing risk management and containment. One email from the hospital's legal counsel to the head of pediatrics simply read, "Do not discuss the bracelet discrepancy with the families until we have a clear strategy." They knew within 48 hours, Marianne said, tossing a printout onto the table. They knew before you even went home. We tracked down a retired nurse named Sarah Jenkins. She was living in a quiet assisted living facility about 20 miles south of Haven Ridge. She was 72 years old, frail, with hands that shook when she poured tea. When Marianne showed her the hospital logs, Sarah didn't look surprised. She looked relieved. We called it the Harrow incident, Sarah told us. Her voice was thin, like dry leaves skittering on pavement. Helen Vance was the charge nurse. She came in during the shift change and found 2 bassinets with the wrong ID cards. The bracelets didn't match the cards. She panicked. Instead of locking down the ward and calling the police, she tried to fix it herself. She swapped them back based on what she thought was right. She guessed, I said, feeling a cold pit open in my stomach. She guessed which baby was which. She didn't want to lose her license, Sarah said, looking down at her lap. And the administration? They didn't want the lawsuit, so when the rumors started, they crushed them. They told us that if we spoke about it, we would be blacklisted. They told us it was just a paperwork error, not a physical switch. But the Adamses knew, I said. How did they know? Sarah looked at me with pity. Because your mother, Mrs. Adams, she noticed the bracelet was loose when she got home. She called the hospital. They brought you back in for a checkup. That is when the lawyers got involved. That confirmed the timeline. The settlement I found in the envelope was dated 1998, nearly 2 years later. That meant there was a 2-year period where my parents, my captors, were negotiating the price of my life. That afternoon, Marianne found the smoking gun regarding the money. We had the settlement agreement I had stolen from the house, the one for $250,000. But Marianne, being Marianne, dug deeper. She subpoenaed the bank records for Robert and Linda Adams from 1998, using the identity theft investigation as probable cause. She put a document in front of me. It was a copy of a cashier's check. Look at the date, she said. The check was dated June 20th, 1998. It was a deposit into their joint savings account for the full settlement amount. Now look at this, Marianne said, sliding a second document over the first. It was the deed to the house in Haven Ridge, the house where I grew up, the house where I had been humiliated 3 days ago. The purchase date was July 15th, 1998. The down payment listed was exactly $50,000. I did the math in my head. They received the hush money in June. They bought the house in July. They bought the house with me, I said. My voice was flat. I wasn't a child to them. I was a winning lottery ticket. They used the settlement from the hospital to upgrade their lifestyle. It gets worse, Marianne said. She didn't believe in sugarcoating. The settlement wasn't just goodwill money. I had a contact at the hospital legal department pull the full archived file. The agreement required a signature from a guardian ad litem because you were a minor. Your parents petitioned the court to approve the settlement on your behalf. What does that mean? It means they legally sold your right to sue, Marianne said. They stood before a judge and argued that $250,000 was fair compensation for the mix-up. They argued that it was in your best interest to take the money and sign a confidentiality agreement. They legally bound you to silence before you could even speak. I felt a surge of rage so hot it made my vision blur. They hadn't just taken money. They had actively, legally maneuvered to ensure I could never claim my own history. They had signed my name to a lie. I needed to see her, not him, him. I understood. My father was a man who looked at the world as a series of columns to be balanced. But my mother, the woman who had bandaged my knees, who had taught me to braid my hair, I needed to know if she was just a passenger in his vehicle or if she was driving too. I knew her schedule. I knew that on Tuesday afternoons, she went to the expansive garden center on the edge of town to buy potting soil and annuals. It was her sanctuary. I borrowed Marianne's car. I drove to the garden center and parked 3 spots away from her silver SUV. I waited. She came out 20 minutes later, pushing a cart loaded with flats of pansies. She looked normal. That was the most offensive part. She was wearing her gardening clogs and a fleece vest. She looked like a suburban grandmother who didn't have a care in the world. I got out of the car and walked up to her just as she was popping the trunk. "Mom," I said. She jumped, dropping a flat of flowers. Purple petals scattered across the asphalt. "Riley," she breathed. She looked around quickly, scanning the parking lot to see if anyone was watching. "You shouldn't be here. Your father said—" "I don't care what he said." I cut her off. I stepped closer, my boots crunching on the ruined flowers. "I know about the settlement. I know about 1998. Her face went slack. The fear didn't look like panic anymore. It looked like exhaustion. "We didn't have a choice," she said. Her voice was a whisper, but it wasn't an apology. It was a defense. "You bought the house with the money," I said. "You used the money they paid you for taking the wrong baby, and you bought a colonial in Haven Ridge." "We needed a home," she said, her voice gaining a little strength. "We were living in a rental. We had a child. We had you. What were we supposed to do? Give the money back? Disrupt your life?" The hospital told us it was too late to switch back. They said the other family, the Harrows, they said it would be too traumatic. "So you took the cash," I said. "We invested it," she insisted. "In us. In the family. We did it for you. Riley, we wanted you to have a backyard. We wanted you to have a good school district." "And the ledger?" I asked. "The spreadsheet? Why keep track of every dime you spent on me if you had already been paid $250,000 up front?" She looked away. She couldn't meet my eyes. "That was Robert," she said quietly. He felt we needed to be sure we weren't losing ground." And then I understood. I understood the cruelty in a way that made my blood run cold. The ledger wasn't about cost. It was a moral disguise. It was a psychological trick they played on themselves. If they convinced themselves that raising me was an immense financial burden, that I was a drain on their resources, then they could justify keeping the settlement money. They could justify the identity theft. They could tell themselves they earned it because I was so expensive. If I was a gift, keeping the money was theft. But if I was a burden, keeping the money was compensation. "You monster," I said softly. She flinched. "I loved you, Riley, in my own way." "No," I said. "You managed me. You managed an asset." I turned and walked away. I didn't look back at her standing among the crushed pansies. I didn't care if she cried. Her tears were just another form of currency she was trying to spend. I drove back to the hotel. Marianne was on the phone when I walked in, but she hung up immediately when she saw my face. "You were right," I said. "It was all strategy." "I have more," Marianne said. She pointed to the laptop screen. I followed the credit report leads. The business loan for Adams Consulting, the one for $150,000 taken out in your name in 2018? "Yes," I said. "I found the contractor invoices," she said. "They didn't use it for consulting. They used it to renovate the master suite and install a heated pool in the backyard." I laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "Of course they did. I paid for their pool. I paid for the bed they sleep in." "And the credit card debt," Marianne continued. Relentless. "The $32,000? It coincides perfectly with the months your father claimed his business was slow and he couldn't help you with your college tuition. He was charging vacations to the Cayman Islands on a card linked to your Social Security number while telling you he couldn't afford to co-sign a student loan." I walked over to the window and looked out at the highway. The cars were rushing by. Oblivious. For the last few days, I had felt a mix of grief and anger. I had wanted to hurt them. I had wanted to scream at them. But now, the feeling was different. It was colder. It was sharper. I didn't just want to hurt them. Pain fades. Screaming stops. I wanted to dismantle them. They had spent 30 years rewriting reality to suit their greed. They had turned to kidnapping, because that is essentially what it was. A kidnapping by contract, into a story of martyrdom. They had turned theft into parental sacrifice. "Marianne," I said, turning away from the window. "Yes?" I don't want a settlement, I said. I don't want them to pay me back and sign a non-disclosure agreement. I don't want quiet justice. What do you want? She asked. I want the record corrected, I said. I want every single person they lied to. The bank, the neighbors, the church, the Harrows. To know exactly what the numbers are. I want to stop them from rewriting the story. Marianne smiled. She opened a new file on her laptop. Then we are going to need to prepare for the meeting, she said. Because your father just emailed me. He wants to talk. He says he has a counteroffer. Let him talk, I said. Let him think he still has cards to play. I sat down at the table and pulled the stack of evidence toward me. Set the meeting, I said. And make sure the Harrows are there. I want my parents to meet my parents. I called my father on a Tuesday morning. I waited until 10 o'clock. The time I knew he would be on his second cup of coffee, sitting in his home office, feeling the most in control of his small fabricated kingdom. Dad, I said when he answered. My voice was steady. I did not sound angry. I sounded tired. I sounded like a daughter who had run out of fight. I think we need to talk. I think I made a mistake walking out. There was a pause on the line. I could hear him breathing, assessing the data. He was recalculating his position. I am glad you called. Riley, he said. His voice dropped into that familiar, soothing register he used when he was trying to sell a bad insurance policy. Your mother has been sick with worry. We just want to resolve this. We want to be a family again, in whatever way the law allows. I know, I lied. I need closure. I need to understand the terms you were offering. Let's meet, he said quickly. Dinner, tonight, the country club, the Oak Room. It is private. We can speak freely there. Okay, I said. 7 o'clock. I hung up the phone and looked at Marianne. She was sitting across from me at the hotel desk, polishing her glasses. He took the bait, I said. Of course he did, Marianne replied, holding her glasses up to the light. Narcissists always believe that people will eventually come back to their version of reality. He thinks you are broke, scared, and ready to negotiate. He doesn't know about the Harrows, I said. No, Marianne said. And he doesn't know that I have spent the last 24 hours speaking with the fraud department at First National Bank and the local district attorney's office. We spent the afternoon preparing. This was not going to be a screaming match. I was done with screaming. This was a deposition disguised as a dinner. I dressed carefully. I wore a simple black dress, modest, unassuming. I pulled my hair back. I wanted to look like the Riley they knew, the compliant, slightly overwhelmed daughter who needed her father to explain the world to her. I needed them to feel safe. I needed them to feel superior. When I pulled into the circular driveway of the country club of Haven Ridge at 7 o'clock, my stomach tightened. This place was the temple of their social standing. It was where my father played golf with judges and where my mother drank white wine with the garden club. It was the place they came to be seen. I walked into the lobby. The smell of old wood varnish and expensive perfume hit me. The maitre d', a man named Philip who had known me since I was 12, nodded stiffly. They are waiting for you in the Oak Room, Miss Adams, he said. He didn't smile. The gossip must have already started. In Haven Ridge, news travels faster than light. I walked to the private dining room at the back. My parents were already seated. They looked impeccable. My father was wearing a fresh suit. His tie knotted perfectly. My mother was wearing a silk scarf that probably cost more than my car. When I entered, they didn't stand up. They just watched me sit down. You look tired, my mother said. It wasn't a concern. It was an observation of my weakness. It has been a long week, I said, unfolding my napkin. We ordered for you, my father said. The salmon. You always like the salmon. Control, even now, over a piece of fish. Thank you, I said. The waiter poured water and left. Closing the heavy oak door behind him, the silence in the room was thick. So, my father began, clasping his hands on the table. I am glad you came to your senses. This whole outburst was unnecessary. We were all emotional. I was emotional, I corrected him gently. You seemed very prepared, he sighed. A long, theatrical exhale. He looked at my mother, then back at me. His face shifted. The hard lines of the businessman softened into the pained expression of a martyr. Riley, he said, his voice trembling slightly. You have to understand. We were betrayed too. Do you think we wanted this? Do you think we wanted to find out that our flesh and blood was gone? We are victims here. The hospital lied to us. The world lied to us. He was good. If I didn't know about the settlement in 1998, if I didn't know about the $250,000 they took to keep quiet, I might have believed him. He was playing the role of the grieving father perfectly. I understand, I said. It must have been hard. It was torture, my mother added, dabbing her dry eyes with a napkin. Living with that doubt. But we loved you. We took you in. We raised you as our own, even when we suspected. That is why we need to formalize things, my father said. He reached into his briefcase, the same leather briefcase he had brought to the birthday party, and pulled out a new document. It was not the release form from before. It was something thicker. What is this? I asked. This is a fairness agreement, he said. We talked to our lawyer, since you are technically, legally, a stranger to us now, and since we have invested so much over the years, we need to structure a repayment plan. It is only fair. We are not asking for the full amount right away. We are willing to stretch it out. He slid the document across the tablecloth. I opened it. I read the first page. It was an installment plan. It demanded $500 a month for the next 20 years. It demanded 40% of any future inheritance I might receive from third parties. It demanded that I indemnify them against any charges of fraud or identity theft. It was insanity. It was a document that no court on earth would uphold. But he wasn't relying on the courts. He was relying on my guilt. He was relying on the fact that for 30 years, I had been trained to seek his approval. And if I sign this? I asked. Then what? Then we can move on, my mother said. We can put this ugliness behind us. We can still be close. We can still be a family, in spirit. I looked at the document. I looked at the clause about the 40% of future inheritance. They knew. They absolutely knew about the Harrow Trust. They were trying to garnish my inheritance before I even received it. I need to understand the math, I said, keeping my voice level. The $400,000 in debt you mentioned before, the mortgage, the business loans, is that included in this? That is separate, my father said quickly. Those are joint investments. We will handle the management of those accounts. You just need to sign this waiver so the bank doesn't get confused. Confused? I repeated. You mean so they don't find out I didn't sign the applications? Riley, he said, his voice sharpening. Don't get technical. We are trying to help you. If the bank starts digging, it hurts everyone. It hurts you. Do you want a fraud investigation on your record? He was threatening me with his own crimes. He was betting that I was too stupid to understand that I was the victim, not the perpetrator. Can you send me this via email? I asked. I want to read it over on my tablet. The print is small. We can sign it now, he pressed. I will sign it, I said, forcing a weak smile. I just want a digital copy for my files, so I can budget for the payments. He hesitated. He didn't like creating a digital trail. But greed is a powerful motivator. He wanted that signature. He wanted that 40%. Fine, he said. He pulled out his phone. I am emailing it to you now. My phone buzzed in my purse. I checked it. The email was there. Attached was the PDF of the Fairness Agreement, sent from his personal account. He had just handed me a written attempt at extortion. Thank you, I said. And the accounts? The credit cards? Can you send me a list of those too, so I know which ones you are managing for me? I will send the spreadsheet tomorrow, he said. Now, please, I said. I want to settle everything tonight. I want to sleep tonight. He sighed again, annoyed, but he tapped on his phone. A second email arrived. Subject: Joint Accounts List. I opened it. It was a list of every fraudulent account he had opened in my name: the mortgage, the boat loan, the credit cards. He had labeled them joint family assets. I had it. I had the confession. I looked up at him. The waiter brought the salmon. It smelled like lemon and betrayal. "Is there something else?" my father asked. He sensed the shift. He saw that my shoulders were no longer slumped. He saw that I was not eating. "Yes," I said. "I heard something interesting today. Aunt Sarah called me." My mother froze. "Sarah called you?" "She was very upset," I said. "She said you told her that I was blackmailing you. She said you told the whole family that I threatened to go to the police with false accusations unless you paid me off. She said you told her I was on drugs." My father put his fork down. "We had to explain the situation. Riley, we had to explain why you ran away. We were protecting your reputation." "By telling people I am a drug addict and an extortionist?" I asked. "We are controlling the narrative," he said coldly. "People talk. We needed to give them a reason why you were acting so erratic. It is better for you this way. If they think you are sick, they will forgive you when you come back." Preemptive reputation damage. They knew that if the truth came out, that they were child snatchers and thieves, they would be pariahs. So they decided to destroy my credibility first. If I went to the police later, I would just be the unstable daughter they had warned everyone about. "I see," I said. "So it is about the story." "It is always about the story," my father said. "Perception is reality. Riley, you should know that by now." I picked up my phone. "I learned a lot from you, Dad," I said. "I learned that you should always get things in writing, and I learned that you should never let a lie stand." I tapped the screen. I had prepared a message earlier. It was simple. It was addressed to a group chat that included my aunts, uncles, cousins, and the pastor. To family. There is an ongoing legal investigation regarding financial fraud and identity theft involving my accounts. I have been advised by counsel not to discuss the details. But please be aware that any claims regarding my health or extortion are false and are being documented for defamation suits. The truth is in the paperwork. Riley. I hit send. My father's phone buzzed on the table, then my mother's. My father looked down. He read the preview notification. His face turned a color I had never seen before, a grayish, sickly white. "What did you do?" he whispered. "I controlled the narrative," I said. "You ungrateful little—" He started to stand up, but he didn't get to finish the sentence. The heavy oak door of the private room opened. It wasn't the waiter. 3 people walked in. One was Marianne Locke. She looked terrifyingly happy. The second was a man in a dark suit, holding a thick stack of envelopes. I recognized the insignia on his lapel pin. He was a process server. The third person was a woman with a severe haircut and a badge on her belt. She was from the compliance division of First National Bank. "Robert Adams? Linda Adams?" the process server asked. "You can't be in here," my father sputtered. "This is a private club." "We are here to serve you with a temporary restraining order regarding the assets of the Harrow estate," the process server said, dropping a heavy envelope onto the salmon, "and a civil complaint for conversion, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty." My mother let out a small squeak. The woman from the bank stepped forward. "Mr. Adams, I am Agent Lewis from the Fraud Investigation Unit. We have received notice of irregular activity on accounts linked to the Social Security number ending in 4522. We are here to confiscate the cards associated with that profile and to inform you that your personal assets have been frozen pending a federal audit." "Frozen?" my father choked. "You can't freeze my accounts. I am a member here." "Not anymore," Marianne said. She walked over to the table and picked up the fairness agreement he had printed out. She glanced at it and laughed. "Nice try, Bob. Really? A fairness agreement? That is going to look wonderful as Exhibit A." My father looked at me. His eyes were wide, panicked. He looked around the room as if searching for an exit. But the only way out was blocked by the law. "Riley," he pleaded, "stop this. Tell them it is a mistake. We can fix this. We can talk." "We already talked," I said. "You wanted a negotiation. This is it." I stood up. I picked up my purse. "You were right about one thing," I said to him. "Perception is reality, and right now, the perception is that you are criminals." "They will arrest us," my mother wailed. "Riley, they will take us to jail." "Civil investigators don't make arrests," I said calmly. "Not yet, but the FBI agents who review the bank's report might." I looked at the waiter, who was standing in the doorway, looking horrified. "Put the salmon on their tab," I said. "If their cards still work." I walked out of the Oak Room. I walked past the process server and the bank agent. I walked past Marianne, who gave me a subtle wink. I walked through the lobby of the country club, past the people who had judged me for 30 years. I walked out into the cool night air. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from my cousin Mike. "Mike, holy shit! Riley, is this real? Uncle Bob told us you were in rehab." "Riley, it is real. Mike, ask him about the settlement check from 1998. I got into my car. My hands were not shaking. My heart was not racing. I felt a strange, deep stillness. My parents were not panicking because they felt guilty about stealing my life. They were panicking because the lights had been turned on. They were panicking because the audience they had cultivated for 30 years, the club, the church, the family, was about to see the script. They didn't fear losing me. They never really had me. They feared losing control. And I had just taken the remote. The fallout from the country club confrontation was not instant. It was a slow, creeping fracture that started the moment I drove away from the portico and merged onto the dark highway. By the next morning, the silence that had defined my family for 30 years had shattered into 1,000 noisy pieces. My phone, which I had silenced before sleeping, was vibrating against the nightstand at 6 a.m. I picked it up. There were 42 notifications. They were a mix of confusion, anger, and hesitant apologies. My cousin Mike had sent 3 more texts, escalating from shock to a demand for details. Aunt Sarah, the family gossip who had looked at me with such disdain in my parents' living room, had left a voicemail. Her voice sounded thin and wobbly. "Riley," the voicemail said, "it is Aunt Sarah. I saw your message. Your father called me last night. He was shouting. He said you were trying to ruin them. But then I talked to Mrs. Gable, and she said she saw police cars, or at least official cars, at the club. I just want to know what is happening. We were told something very different." I didn't call her back. I didn't call anyone back. Marianne had advised me to let the information sit. "Let them stew," she had said. "Let them compare notes. The truth is consistent. Lies vary. Eventually, they will realize everyone was told a slightly different version of the story." It turned out the lie my parents had spun was far more insidious than I had realized. Around noon, I received a message from a woman named Clara, a neighbor I had babysat for when I was a teenager. Clara was kind. Usually, at the party, she had refused to look at me. Now, she sent a long paragraph. "Riley, I am so sorry. I didn't know. Your mother told us that the intervention was necessary because you were in serious trouble with gambling debt. She said you were planning to steal their retirement savings to pay off a loan shark. She told us the party was a way to confront you with the costs so you would see the reality of your addiction. We thought we were saving you." I stared at the screen. Gambling debt, loan sharks. It was projection. Pure, psychological projection. My parents were the ones gambling with stolen money. My parents were the ones terrified of debt. But they had painted me as the predator to inoculate the herd against the truth. They had weaponized the community's concern to cover their own greed. They invited 70 people to witness my humiliation, not just to hurt me, but to create 70 alibis if I ever tried to claim the money. They could point to 70 upstanding citizens who would testify that I was a desperate addict trying to extort my elderly parents. It was brilliant. It was evil. And it was falling apart. I went to work. I had to. I needed the routine. I needed to remember that I was Riley Adams, the logistics coordinator at Brightwell and Company Solutions, not Riley Adams, the unwanted actuarial error. I walked into the office expecting stares. I expected the gossip from Haven Ridge to have bled over into my professional life. I kept my head down, walking straight to my cubicle. "Riley?" a voice called out. It was Marcus, my boss. He was standing in the doorway of his office. He didn't look angry. He looked concerned. "Can you come in here for a minute?" he asked. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. My father had probably called him. My father had probably told him the drug addict story. I was going to be fired. I walked into his office and sat down. "I got a call this morning," Marcus said, closing the door. "From a compliance officer at First National Bank. They were verifying your employment status and checking if your payroll direct deposit had been flagged for diversion." "I can explain," I started, my voice shaking. "It is a personal legal matter. I am the victim of identity theft. My parents." Marcus held up a hand. "I know. The officer explained that your social security number was being used for unauthorized business loans. She wanted to make sure our payroll system hadn't been compromised." He looked at me, really looked at me. "Riley, you have been with us for 5 years," he said. "You are the most detailed person I know. You caught that shipping error last month that saved us $12,000. I told the bank officer that if there was fraud, you certainly weren't the one committing it." I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes. It was the first time in a week that an authority figure, someone other than Marianne, had sided with me without hesitation. "Thank you," I whispered. "I locked down your HR file," Marcus said. "I put a password on it. No one can access your tax forms or change your direct deposit info without coming through me personally. If your family tries to call here, and based on what the bank said, they won't get past the front desk. They might say things," I warned him. "My father is telling people I am unstable." "Riley," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair, "you organized the chaotic mess that was the Q3 distribution log. Unstable people don't do that. You are safe here. Work is work. Leave the drama at the door. But know that inside these walls, you are judged by your spreadsheets, not your DNA." It was the greatest gift he could have given me. Stability. For 8 hours a day. I wasn't a scandal. I was an employee. While I was finding sanctuary in spreadsheets, Marianne was waging war in the courts. She filed 3 motions that afternoon. The first was a motion to freeze the assets of the Adams estate. The second was a petition to remove Robert Adams as the custodian of any accounts bearing my name. The third was a formal accusation of fraud against the estate of Celia Harrow. Citing the forged authorization my parents had attempted to use, the pressure was working. By 3 o'clock, the legal counsel for Lake Briar Medical Center called Marianne. They were panicking. The local news had gotten a whiff of the story, not the full details, but enough to know that a historic identity error was being investigated. The hospital wanted to kill the story before it became a national headline. They offered a settlement, Marianne told me over the phone. $500,000, immediate payout, no admission of guilt, confidentiality agreement. 500,000, I repeated. It was double what my parents had taken in 1998. "It is a low-ball offer," Marianne said, her voice sharp. "They are testing the waters. They think you are desperate for cash. They think you are the scared girl who walked out of her birthday party with a duffel bag." "I am not that girl anymore," I said. "Exactly," Marianne said. "I told them to multiply it by 10 and call me back when they are serious. We don't want a quick check. Riley, we want the records. We want the full internal investigation. We want to know exactly who signed off on the switch." "Do not settle," I said. "Not yet. I want them sweating." "Oh, they are sweating," Marianne assured me. "But here's the interesting part. I got a call from Agent Lewis at the bank. She found something in the transaction logs that you need to know." "What?" I asked. "Your father didn't just try to access the trust money 3 months ago." Marianne said, "He tried to move money out of his own accounts. The accounts funded by your credit lines, exactly 7 days before your birthday. He was liquidating, I realized. He tried to wire $200,000 to an offshore account in Belize, Marianne said. The bank flagged it because it exceeded his usual transaction limits. He claimed it was for consulting fees, but the timing is what matters. October 19th. 1 week before I turned 30, I said. He knew the deadline was coming, Marianne said. He knew that the moment you turned 30, the Harrow Trust would either mature or the trustee would come looking for you. He was trying to cash out and hide the assets before the explosion. It all made sense. The party wasn't just a cruel dismissal, it was a demolition. They needed to destroy my credibility and cut ties with me before the investigation started. If I was out of the house, signed off on a release, and branded a drug addict by the community, no one would believe me when I claimed they stole my inheritance. They were planning to take the money, hide it offshore, and leave me with the wreckage of a life they had hollowed out. That night, back at the hotel, I stared at the ceiling. The air conditioner hummed a rhythmic, monotonous tune. I felt a strange sense of clarity. The pieces of the puzzle were no longer jagged shards. They were forming a picture of sociopathic precision. My phone rang at 11:30 at night. I knew who it was before I looked. I picked it up. "Hello, Mother?" There was silence on the other end for a long time. Then, a sound I recognized. The sound of ice cubes clinking in a glass. She was drinking. "We are ruined," she said. Her voice was slurred, trembling, heavy with self-pity. "Do you know that? Your father. He is in the study. He hasn't spoken in hours. The bank cards don't work. The club called and suspended our membership pending the investigation. We are ruined. Riley, you ruined yourselves," I said. "I just turned on the lights." "We fed you," she whispered. "We clothed you. We gave you a home. You gave me a cage," I said, "and you charged me rent to live in it. We were a family," she cried out, the trembling turning into a sob. "Doesn't that mean anything? All the Christmases? The vacations? Was it all nothing to you?" "It was a job to you," I said. "You kept the receipts, remember? You don't keep receipts for family. You keep receipts for business expenses." The line went quiet again. The sobbing stopped abruptly. The trembling vanished. When she spoke again, her voice was cold. It was the voice of the woman who had packed my bag before I even arrived at the party. "You are making a mistake," she said. "You think you have won because you have a lawyer and a bank agent, but you live in this world. Riley, you live in this town. If you keep pushing, if you drag us into court, I will tell them everything. I will tell them things about you that aren't true, but they will be so ugly that people will believe them anyway. I will ruin your name so thoroughly that you will never get a job in this state again." It was a naked threat. It was the last desperate hiss of a cornered snake. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel sadness. I felt a profound sense of detachment. "You don't get it," I said softly. "You think I am worried about my reputation. You think I am worried about what the neighbors think." "You should be," she snapped. "I'm not," I said, "because I have the one thing you never had. I have the truth, and the truth doesn't need to shout." "I will destroy you," she hissed. "You already tried," I said. "You tried to erase me. You tried to replace me with a spreadsheet, but you failed. You pushed me, Mother. You pushed me right out the door and into the arms of the people you stole from." I paused. "I am just removing the mask," I said, "and I think you are terrified of what is underneath." I hung up the phone. I didn't block the number. I wanted them to be able to reach me. I wanted them to know that I was still here, still listening, still waiting. The next morning, Marianne told me that the district attorney had upgraded the inquiry. It wasn't just a civil investigation anymore. The amount of money involved, the hospital settlement, the fraudulent loans, the attempted wire transfer, had crossed the threshold into criminal territory. We had a meeting scheduled for Friday, a final mediation before the indictments came down. My parents would be there, the hospital representatives would be there, the bank would be there, And for the first time, the Harrows would be there. It was going to be the party my parents had actually deserved, a room full of witnesses, a folder full of evidence, and a reckoning that no amount of social standing could prevent. I texted David Harrow. "Riley, they want to meet. Friday. Are you ready?" He replied instantly. "David, Eleanor and I have been ready for 30 years. We will be there." I put the phone down. The pressure cooker was whistling. The lid was about to blow off, and I was the one holding the match. The mediation took place in a conference room on the 42nd floor of a building in downtown Philadelphia. It was a sterile, glass-walled box that smelled of lemon polish and expensive carpet. This was not the chaotic living room in Haven Ridge where my parents had tried to stage a public execution. This was a place where silence was heavy and expensive. On one side of the long mahogany table sat the legal team for Lake Briar Medical Center. They looked nervous. They had 3 binders of documents and were sweating despite the aggressively cool air conditioning. Next to them sat Agent Lewis from the bank, her face set in a permanent expression of professional disapproval. On the other side sat Robert and Linda Adams, my parents. They looked small, without the backdrop of their carefully curated home, without the audience of neighbors to nod at their performance. They looked diminished. My father's suit, usually so sharp, looked slightly ill-fitting, as if he had shrunk inside it over the last few days. My mother was staring at a pitcher of water in the center of the table, refusing to lift her eyes. And then there were the Harrows. David and Eleanor sat at the far end of the table, next to me. They did not speak. They did not scream. They just watched the Adamses with a quiet, devastating intensity. It was the look of people who had been robbed of a lifetime and were finally seeing the thieves in the light. Marianne Locke stood at the head of the table. She did not pace. She did not shout. She simply opened her file and began to dismantle 30 years of lies. "We are here to establish the record," Marianne said. Her voice was calm, the voice of a surgeon explaining a necessary amputation. "We are not here to debate feelings. We are here to address a timeline of fraud, conversion, and breach of fiduciary duty." She placed a document on the projector. It was the settlement agreement from 1998. In June of 1998, Robert and Linda Adams accepted $250,000 from Lake Briar Medical Center. Marianne stated, "They signed a confidentiality agreement. They legally waived the rights of their minor child, the plaintiff, Riley Adams, to seek future damages. They agreed to silence in exchange for capital." My father cleared his throat. "We did it to protect her," he said. His voice was raspy. "We wanted to move on. We wanted to give her a good life. You used $50,000 of that settlement for a down payment on a house titled solely in your names," Marianne corrected him. "You used the remaining $200,000 to fund a lifestyle that exceeded your documented income by 40% for the next decade." She clicked a button. The projector changed. Now it showed the spreadsheet, the Riley costs ledger that my father had flourished at the party. "This document," Marianne said, pointing to the screen, "was presented to Riley Adams on her 30th birthday as proof of her debt to the family. It lists medical expenses, food, and education costs." Agent Lewis from the bank spoke up then. She didn't even look at my father. She looked at her notes. "Our forensic audit shows that the funds used to pay for the items on this list, specifically the college tuition and the medical bills, did not come from Robert Adams' employment income." Agent Lewis said, "They came from a series of loans and credit lines opened in the name of Riley Adams, beginning when she was 14 years old." The room went deadly silent. "You were billing her for money you borrowed in her name." Marianne said, "You weren't tracking your generosity, Mr. Adams. You were tracking the burn rate of a stolen identity. You were keeping a ledger to make sure you didn't steal more than you could plausibly deny." My father stood up. He was shaking. Tears began to well up in his eyes. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times. The wounded patriarch, the man doing his best in a cruel world. "We were victims too," he cried out. his voice cracking. Do you think it was easy? Knowing she wasn't ours? Knowing that every time we looked at her, we were reminded of the child we lost? We loved her. We tried. We are just human beings. He looked at the Harrows, pleading for sympathy. We raised your daughter, he said to David. We fed her. We clothed her. Doesn't that count for anything? David Harrow stood up. He moved slowly, deliberately. He placed his hands on the table and leaned forward. You didn't raise our daughter, David said. His voice was low, but it carried a weight that crushed the air out of the room. You held her hostage. You took a settlement to keep her, and then you spent 30 years calculating how to profit from her. We didn't know for sure, my mother sobbed. We only suspected. Marianne slid a piece of paper across the table. It was the email from the hospital administrator to the legal team. Dated October 16th, 1996. We found the correspondence, Marianne said. You called the hospital 2 days after discharge. You told Nurse Vance that the baby didn't look right. You told her the bracelet was loose. You knew in 1996. You negotiated the price in 1997. You signed the deal in 1998. My mother stopped sobbing. The tears vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, hard look of calculation. The mask had slipped, and there was no point in putting it back on. We did what we had to do, my mother said. We were broke. We had a baby. The hospital offered us a way out. And the trust? Marianne asked. The $2.4 million you tried to access last month? That was her money, my father muttered, sitting back down. We were her parents. We were entitled to manage it. You aren't her parents, I said. I hadn't spoken until that moment. Everyone turned to look at me. I stood up. I didn't feel like crying. I didn't feel like screaming. I felt like I was finally waking up from a long, confusing dream. You aren't my parents, I repeated. Parents don't keep receipts. Parents don't open credit cards in their teenager's name. Parents don't stage a public humiliation to force their child to sign a waiver. I looked at my father. You don't get to call yourselves my parents when it is convenient. You don't get to be mom and dad when you want a loan. And then victims of fraud when the bill comes due. I turned to the hospital lawyers. I am not signing a confidentiality agreement. I told them, I want the settlement, yes, but I want the admission. I want a public apology from Lake Briar Medical Center stating that their negligence allowed this to happen, and I want it in the newspaper. The lead lawyer looked pale. We can discuss the language, he stammered. Good, I said, because if we don't, I will let Marianne take this to a jury, and I don't think a jury is going to like the idea of a hospital buying a baby's silence. Then I turned to the bank agent. Freeze it all, I said. The house, the cars, the offshore account he tried to set up. If it was paid for with my identity, I want it liquidated. I want the debt in my name cleared to zero. It is already in process, Agent Lewis said. We are seizing the assets to satisfy the fraudulent loans. They will be left with their legal Social Security benefits and nothing else. My father put his head in his hands. He was weeping for real now, not because he was sorry, but because he was broke. Finally. I turned to the Harrows. They were looking at me with hope. They were good people. I could see that. They were grieving parents who had found a miracle in the wreckage of a tragedy. They wanted to take me home. They wanted to wrap me in the life I should have had. The trust, I said to them. The $2.4 million. It is yours, David said quickly. All of it. We don't want a penny. We want you. I will accept the trust, I said. Not as a gift, and not as payment for the pain. I am taking it as a reclamation. It is the only thing from my past that wasn't touched by them. I gestured to the Adamses. It is the only thing that is actually mine. I took a deep breath. This was the hardest part. But I need you to know something, I said to David and Eleanor. I am not Natalie. I can't be the daughter you lost. I can't fill that hole in your hearts. I am 30 years old. I have a job I like. I have a life in Philadelphia. I am messy, I drink cheap wine. I have trust issues that will probably take a decade to fix." Eleanor nodded, tears streaming down her face. "We know," she whispered. "If you want me in your life," I said, "it has to be as Riley. You have to get to know me, the real me, not the ghost of the girl who died, and not the projection of the daughter you wanted." David reached across the table. He didn't try to hug me. He just laid his hand palm up on the mahogany, an open invitation. "We would like to get to know Riley," he said. I looked at his hand. It looked like mine. I reached out and took it. His grip was warm. It felt real. The meeting ended an hour later. The lawyer signed the papers. The bank agent packed up her files. My parents, the Adamses, left the room without looking back. They walked out of my life carrying nothing but their own shame. They were leaving to face a future of bankruptcy hearings and legal battles, trapped in the very poverty they had stolen my identity to escape. I didn't watch them go. I walked out of the building with Marianne and the Harrows. The sun was shining on the streets of Philadelphia. It was a bright, cold autumn day. "What now?" Marianne asked, adjusting her glasses. "Now," I said. "I am going to go home. I have some boxes to unpack." I said goodbye to the Harrows. We made plans for dinner the following week. No pressure, just dinner. It was a start. I took a cab back to my apartment. It was still empty, still echoing. The boxes I had packed on my birthday were still sitting by the door, taped shut, ready for a flight that never happened. I walked into the kitchen. On the counter, sitting alone in the middle of the empty space, was the bottle of wine, the $12 red blend, the one with the black dog on the label. I had carried it to the party. I had carried it to the IHOP. I had carried it to the hotel. It had been the only constant companion through the worst week of my life. I opened the drawer and found a corkscrew. I pulled the cork. It made a soft, satisfying pop. I didn't have a glass, so I poured a little into a coffee mug. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city. I saw the cars moving in the grid below. I saw the people walking, living their lives, unaware of the dramas unfolding in the high-rises above them. I took a sip. It wasn't great wine. It was a little acidic, a little sharp, but it tasted like mine. I wasn't a line item on a spreadsheet anymore. I wasn't a replacement child. I wasn't a fraud. I was Riley Adams. And for the first time in 30 years, the story I was writing belonged completely to me. I raised the mug to the empty room. "Happy birthday," I whispered, and then I drank. "Thank you so much for listening to this story. I really hope you enjoyed following Riley's journey from betrayal to justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please leave a comment down below and tell me which country or city you are listening in. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you want to hear more stories like this, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Monica Revenge Stories. Hit that like button, and give the video a hype to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to me.